Test 1, 2.
That's good one. That's why
Please rise if you're able to for the Honorable Lourdes A. Leon Guerrero Magahagan Guahan, Governor of Guam, and the Honorable Joshua F. Tenorio Segunda Magalahan Guahan, Lieutenant Governor of Guam.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
Hafa day, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here at the office of the Governor for a very special announcement by our Governor, Lou Leon Guerrero, and our Lieutenant Governor, Josh Tenorio. Also at the table, we have our Acting Director for the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority. That's Director Fernando Esteves, as well as his Board Chairman, Dr. John Rivera, and our Vice Chair, Nate Sanchez. Also joining us at the table are the various agency directors for our Health and Human Services agencies. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor now to the Honorable Lourdes A. Leon Guerrero, our Governor of Guam.
Thank you very much, Crystal, and thank you for your presence here to participate in our press conference. This is actually the very first press conference that we've ever held to talk about the hospital and to talk about our vision in building a new hospital. And so in the interest of more public information, I'd just like to start off by saying that when Lieutenant Governor Josh and I were elected in 2018, shortly after that, we commissioned the Army Corps of Engineers to give a complete assessment of the current hospital in terms of the integrity of its facility. After 2 weeks and bringing in many experts throughout the nation, the Army Corps of Engineers then came back with 2 recommendations. One, if we were going to renovate the current hospital, it would cost $763 million. If we were going to buy or build a new hospital, it would cost $743 million. So several things came to my thinking. One is, it really is going to be almost impossible to build or renovate a hospital and continue its operations at the same time. Second, it's also, I think, kind of not prudent to take an old hospital, an old building, and try to retrofit it when we could really build a totally new structure for our people. In that whole thinking and strategizing with my cabinet members, we also felt that we need to locate a hospital in the center of the island where it could be easily accessible or maybe quicker access to the hospital. And that's how we came up with Mangilao. Mangilao, if you look at the map, is in the center of the island. And if you look at the map, you have shorter access from the south, from the central, from the north, and of course, the east and the west. So in looking at that place, I started to look around. And on one tour with Admiral Manoni, when I asked him, is there any federal property that they could either lease or deed over to us? He came back with 3 options. And the most possible option and the most appropriate option was Eagles Field. So we went that route, went down that route. We were working with the military to provide a no-cost lease. However, the legislature did not support that and voted it down. I then proceeded to look at some property that is maybe our own government property. That's how we came about with Eda Agaga. It's a crown lands, not owned by anybody, and so it was actually very real to use that. Again, I brought the option to the legislature and they voted it down. Let me be very clear. Our people need a new hospital. In order for us to have a new hospital, we have to find a location. Twice I found a location and the legislature did not support it. So we got our people together and we came up with a very innovative way of buying property. This is property that is owned by a private entity. It's not government property, and so we do not have to go to the legislature for this property. With the advice from our legal and other people, we started to look at how maybe GURA can help us. Because as we understand, GURA's mandate is urban development and housing. And in their housing mandate, healthcare facility is one of the authorities that they have. So I wrote a letter to the board asking them to please do a resolution or have a meeting and discuss this possibility of GURA buying the property. So here we are now. Good things happened. GURA said it was okay within their mandate. The board approved it, and I'd just like to thank the board of GURA for being very forward-thinking and being really very compliant and aligned with what their mission is. And we have here the GURA chairperson, Dr. John Rivera, of course, and Nate Sanchez, who is the vice chair of GURA. I also have with me Fernando Esteves, who is the deputy director for GURA, who, if you have any questions, can maybe answer your technical questions. So we found property in Mangilao, right next to Eagles Field, private property. And GURA did all the processes within their legal authority to make it happen. And Fernando can go over the details of that process if you are interested. But they commissioned a real estate agent. They went out with requests for proposal or interest. Interest came. GURA negotiated with a particular property. The owner of that property agreed with the negotiated price. The owner of the property, it's an estate, so they had to go through the courts for approval. Last Thursday, the courts approved the sale of this property. And the sale of the property is under the estate of Catalina Eclavea Camacho. And so now, in a couple of days, we will finalize the purchase of this property. The property is 48 acres in Mangilao. The cost of the property was $3.5 million. It was appraised, and that was the value. And again, GURA managed the acquisition of the property. I am very happy for the people of Guam because now we are very clear on the direction. A site is located. We will now go into moving forward with preparatory work and preparatory necessities of preparing the land, topography, infrastructure, getting an architectural and engineer firm, and then we can have a better idea of the actual cost of the construction. But rest assured, I just want the people of Guam to have a sigh of relief because now we have a site for your new hospital. And so we were targeting to do this work by the end of this year. And just for your information, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about ARP monies, I do have about $120 million of ARP money that I have set aside. And I have argued incessantly that that should be for the beginning work of the preparatory work for new hospital and construction. So now we have $120 million. We do not have any delays in funding for the preparatory work. And as we go along, we are going to be getting grants from federal government, grants maybe from DOD, and of course, out in the open market. These are the resources of funding for the value of the construction of the hospital. Our strategy is to try and get groundbreaking in the next year and a half for our hospital. Once that happens, we probably will have a new hospital in 4 to 5 years. We are very aggressive. Our administration is very aggressive. Why? Because this is something that is so direly needed for our people in terms of health care. People worry about their health. They go off island, spend lots of money on medical care. With this new hospital and with working with other entities, private and public, we can assure you that there will be a hospital on our island that will meet the needs of our medical care for our people. I don't have any more comments. I'll turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor for his comment.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. The people of Guam have been looking for action for several years now. And finally today, we have significant action with the site for the new hospital finally selected and acquired. I want to also thank the Governor for setting aside $120 million, which is really a long-term investment to the people of Guam. It's an effort that reduces the cost that may have to be carried by other sources, but certainly is going to allow us to catch up on some progress that has been so long deserved and so long waited for. So Governor, congratulations on this feat. I also want to thank the GURA Board of Directors and GURA for taking the leadership on this. Housing is a big priority for all of us. And we understand that with the population expanding dramatically because of the military expansion of Guam, because we are focused on recovering our tourism and ensuring that we bring people back home, we need a new facility, a healthcare facility they can rely on. And that really is the effort that is being made today. And so I'd like to pass this on now to the Deputy Director of GURA, Fernando Esteves.
Half day, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and everybody. And I'd like to thank the leadership of GURA's board here, our chairman and vice chairman for their support. I think it's very important to understand GURA's history. A lot of times there's not much discussion because, again, only the squeaky wheels get the oil. But we pride ourselves in our ability to move projects forward and complete projects one at a time for the betterment of our community and try to maintain that standard. And so you can't drive anywhere on island without seeing something in the community that GURA's positively touched, whether it's a basketball court, a baseball field, a senior center, assisting in the health care clinic, expansion of mental health facilities, residential treatment facilities. And so, when the governor brought this to our attention, we wanted to be very clear that, we understand your request, Governor, but we're also going to look at it analytically, right? We want to understand that from a community development aspect, that this fits with our overall strategic plan, what we want to do. Not saying that that's a no, but is there any way are there ways that we can create synergy to better work for our community. And so first that we did in going through our processes is look at the matrix study. And regardless of it not being on Eagles Field, even accounting for variances downward, it still was the number one choice for our island. The one thing that didn't really get mentioned in the study that it's very near to us is housing, and it's a purely numerical fact. Is we need thousands of new homes in the next couple of years, and I will tell you for a fact, and we all know they're not going to be built in Tamuning. They're not going to be built across the mansions or in any of those estates. They are going to be built where we have land available to build them. New infrastructure needs to be put down. And so everything aligned with this new hospital. And so while it may, in very marginal amounts, serve the greater population if it were built today, in a short amount of time, the greater population is that it's going to support our increased housing development in the south and increased housing development in the north, particularly on the eastern side of the housing on the island. And new infrastructure is the way to go. And so this aligned with us, along with the need that we know for veteran supportive housing, disability supportive housing, assisted living facilities that are all best centralized around a medical campus, around a medical facility. And so, again, everything aligned. We were happy to support. And, if there are any technical questions or process questions, I'm happy to answer anything that may come up after. So thank you, Governor. Thank you to the board. And we look forward to the continued relationship with GURA and the rest of the executive branch to move these community development initiatives forward. Thank you.
So much, Fernando. And now I want to open the floor to questions from members of our media. Let's have this microphone.
John O'Connor from the Guam Daily Post. Fernando, can you go over again how the property was acquired and what's the purchase price for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we looked at the matrix study, right? And the requirement for the loan was within the vicinity of Mangilao or Barricada. So we looked at, did research on different properties along the location. Our central point was to look at the reference being the matrix study, which said Eagles Field. Fortunately, there were private properties or privately held properties right next to Eagles Field. And so we started exploring in that area. Understanding the property types, understanding any potential build limitations, advantages, disadvantages. And so what we did was we put out a request for qualifications to get qualified agents. We ranked them based on their qualifications. That's all part of the procurement record available for public inspection. They're not paid anything. They're commission based only. We reduced the commission price, knowing that we're going to be doing larger land transactions. And so we reduced that as a potential savings. And so we looked at the areas primarily based on initial location within the vicinity target area. And then we looked at size. So which would provide the greatest size as an anchor point, and which was within the budget. Now, with every transaction that we do, particularly we have federal funds, and these were federal funds that were provided to GURA, the federal standard is appraisal. So appraisal is our baseline. So after we got permission, and actually, once the realtor established that there would be interest in dealing with the government on a potential transaction, we requested permission to conduct the appraisal. We conducted the appraisal, and we made an offer at the appraisal, and it was accepted. Any additional questions?
What was the purchase price of it?
As the governor said, $3.5 million. And those records are public records, documented and filed with the court, but where we can make them available to you and send you a copy of all those purchase records.
And throughout this process, is there any involvement from the Attorney General?
No. There's no statutory requirement for the Attorney General. GURA is autonomous, and we have powers and protections derived in the Organic Act of Guam.
Okay.
Additional questions?
Yeah, well, what's the size of the property?
About 48 acres.
So, Governor, that's about half of what you were looking for previously. Well, what is the plan for the property? Is it still a medical complex?
The plan for this property is to first build a hospital. We are also, Guerrero is also in negotiations with other properties nearby to expand the acreage. And yes, the plan is still for a complex, but the most urgent need right now is to build a hospital. And the 48 acres is very much sufficient for the hospital that we plan to build.
Governor Pauly Suba, glimpses of Guam, understanding that it'll be a while for the new hospital to be built. What will happen to the current hospital? Do you have plans for that? I mean, it might move on to the next governor of Guam to decide what they would like to do with that property. But what are the conversations already happening with your administration?
In relation to the current
The
hospital?
current property, yes.
Oh, so the current property will still be owned, of course, by the government. And there's very conceptual ideas of what it could be used for. Could be maybe look into assisted living, look into government offices, maybe lease it out for development, commercial development. There's a whole lot of, I think, very good options that we can do to get some return on that property.
And my last question is for Fernando Estevez. You mentioned that their homes could be built around the area because essentially you're going to put infrastructure in there, right? But is the property around the area, is that available to purchase? Understanding there's Crown's lands in that area, there's been a hold on that. How will people be able to buy homes there?
So I think excuse me. I think it's going to be a mix. Wow, that's really loud and push this away. It's going to be a mix with other areas on the island based on zoning and based on the master plan. So there's going to be a look at that. But when you look at community development in many different jurisdictions, usually there's kind of a basis and there's a community built around there. So for example, you can go to a college and you have a community, commercial, residential centered around that community facility, being a university, a city college, a hospital, a clinic. And so what we're looking at with this larger area is, the governor may be looking at a medical campus. I respect that. On our end, we're looking at a medical city. And so, there's consideration for commercial development, medium density, multifamily, mixed use residential facilities. While there may be Crown lands, absolutely, they could be considered for future development should Guam be able to pull in more grant funding to support these initiatives, but even also pushing and supporting private developers to build more attainable housing for our community. And so this is a small part of a much bigger initiative that we plan to discuss, and you'll be getting invitations to our housing summit coming up in January. That's going to lay a lot more of that out. And so it's all about synergy. And so I hope that answers your question. But yes, we are looking for increased infrastructure going down that entire Route 15 corridor and beginning to branch off into, as you mentioned, Crown lands, Chamorro Land Trust, privately held lands to spur development all across the island, or for the island in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauly. This next question comes from Candid News. Can you address an insinuation by Chris Barnett that the governor or her family have vested financial interest in either the land itself or nearby property? And is the bank where the governor family has a financial interest involved in any way with the transaction?
There is no involvement of my family or the bank in any of this process and any of this transaction. I do not have any interest in any of the private properties there. There is no financial interest that I know of. You would of the bank. So there isn't. It's I think fishing. And I think it's another way of, again, trying to discredit this great movement for the people of Guam. And I think our people are tired of it, and our people want to just move on and build our new hospital.
Thank you.
After Joe Tyson for the PDN. Question for Mr. Esteves. Could I just get a clarification on that $3.5 million price tag? How exactly was that assessed and arrived at?
Sure. We order an appraisal, and the appraisals have to meet national standard. That's required for all federal funds. I can share that CFR, that federal regulation. So we follow that. We make sure that the appraiser follows that. Again, it's the baseline. And so again, the appraisal itself, that's a government work product that's available public record. We'd be happy to share you a copy of that. We also make sure that we're very transparent with the people we're negotiating. So because it becomes a public record, even when we're in negotiations, we as a practice have always shared the appraisal with the seller to make sure that, we're not trying to get them out of a deal, but we also make sure that our purchase amount, which is generally, say about 95 to 99%, 95% of the time, is no more than the appraised amount. There are a few exceptions, but they're more the exceptions than the rule. But the vast majority of acquisitions we've always done has always been on the federal standard of appraised value. And so we're happy to share with that. The appraised value was for $3.5 million. That's what we offered them. That's what was accepted.
And that appraisal, was that conducted by Guerrero? Do you guys?
No. We contract that out. Yeah. There's no pie in the sky, wake up one morning and decide we want to do something. We're a professional organization, sir. So yes, we order it by a licensed appraiser.
As far as the property, I know one of the big hangups before was infrastructure installation in the area. Does this have sort of the same infrastructure requirements as Eda Agaga or Eagles Field?
Absolutely, yeah. So the good thing is that from a planning perspective, it's within the margin of error what was planned for Eagles Field. This first property is literally next to Eagles Field, and that's why it was a high choice, right? Because a lot of the initial planning assumptions regarding Eagles Field was based on Eagles Field, right? So when you're looking at running additional lines, sewer, water lines, as well as additional substation for power, those were the things that we were looking at trying to take consideration. So
I guess for Gov, how much additional acreage are we looking to acquire on top of this initial 48 as we move forward?
We're looking to acquire at least another 50 acres.
Is there a timeline for when we want to have the rest of those properties?
Yesterday.
Thank you, Gov. For Mr. Esteves, are there any additional, I know it has to be ironed out next week, but are there any additional terms as far as the purchase that GovGuam will have to comply with the probate?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we would have announced it earlier. I mean, because once you lock into that purchase agreement, it's like basically having a contract, right? But the only one that made this one slightly different, and the reason we couldn't go out to the public earlier, is because this one, since it was owned by an estate, still required that court approval. And so we didn't feel comfortable yet announcing it. I'd like to add that it was never our intention to be secretive about it, but negotiations for real estate are like a procurement, right? When GovGuam negotiates the healthcare contract, they're not televising that. And it's to ensure that everyone is negotiating good faith and that the government is getting the best deal, right? Following all their requirements, and that the person, the seller, is getting a fair deal as well. I mean, because these are families that we're talking about, right? With unresolved land issues. And so they can be sensitive. And so we were very cognizant that we didn't want politics to infect good faith negotiations. And so once those concluded and once the court approved the sale purchase, we wanted to be very transparent with what we're doing. I can assure you that barring any other court approvals necessary for estate sales, once we lock into a purchase agreement, even before we close on that, we'll be letting the public know exactly where we're going to be and what we're looking at.
Thank you. And just for Gov, we have that 120 million lockbox for the hospital. What are the next steps after the purchase that you guys are going to be pouring that money into?
So that money actually was set aside, Joe, to do just the preparatory work. getting an architectural and engineer, looking at the infrastructure, topography, of course, surveying, getting in the infrastructure, water and power, and so forth. So 120 million was set aside for that. I also want to say that we are in communication also with the Guam Water Works Authority. They're ready to come in and make an assessment of what needs to be done to lay down the infrastructure. Also, the area where the property is does have residents around there, but they do not have wastewater treatment, sewage. And this opportunity of building the hospital at that site will also give, I think, the residents around there the ability to hook up into sewage. And so it's a benefit not just for our whole of the people of Guam for a hospital, but also the surrounding areas where we can bring in the infrastructure and they can participate in that. Also, we're looking at, of course, Fernando talked about substations, but we're looking at putting in structures to boost the water availability and the water capacity in those various areas.
Do we have a timeline yet for getting the first patient into the new hospital?
The first patient, man, I would say about maybe 5 years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Governor or Deputy Director Estevez, just for clarification, the families of Catalina, Eclevea, Camacho, are they here in Guam?
Yes, so actually we didn't deal with all the families. It was an estate under probate. So our agent dealt with the legal administrators of the property. And of course, they had to prove to the court that the estate was in agreement with the sale. I hope that answers. So I think they're mixed. I think as I'm understanding, at least just reports back from our agent, is as far as the estate goes, there are some that are here. There's a lot that are in the mainland. And, their general position was the difficulty because there are so many heirs with claims. To try to subdivide that out, do the survey, it was going to be too burdensome versus selling it and doing the distributions to the estate. So I think they were very happy with the sale of the property as we were to acquire it.
And my last one, just for clarity, just so we can follow up and put some closure to Oka Point, the conversation of the Perez family saying that they have donated this land for a hospital. So what's to come with that? Are we going to have those conversations with the Perez family, possibly give back some of that land, or do we have plans as a government for Oka Point?
So the property's under the Chamorro Land Trust. It's under their inventory. So if there was going to be any discussions with the Perez family, it would probably be with the Chamorro Land Trust.
Thank you.
So for the family that owns this property, are there any members of the family working in Gov Guam right now?
I mean,
There are probably hundreds of heirs, so I would say reasonably yes. I'm sure they have a member or two working in Gov Guam. I could tell you there were zero conflicts with Guerrero as the purchaser of the property, which of course we evaluated as a requirement per our policies and per our enabling statutes. So I would say likely yes. I don't know what you're looking for. Would you like to rephrase?
No, I think that answers it.
There, as I'm understanding, hundreds of heirs to this estate, and you can go across the island to many properties where you have large estates that are yet or locked into probate, right? And so, we kind of look at this as we understand this mostly because we understand this as being one of our impediments and challenges when it comes to housing development on the island. Is there are a lot of unsettled estates as a result of lands returned from the federal government. And so you're talking multiple generations in.
Okay. The funding for this came from American Rescue Plan funding, right? That was based on the resolution by Guerrero months ago. And that was a loan offer from the governor? So does Guerrero have to pay that back, or what's the mechanism for that?
Yeah, so the general plan is we are going to transfer the property to GovGuam to build the hospital, and that's going to forgive the loan.
Okay. One of the issues with EPAL Point was the actual topography, the geological structures there. Was there anything found in this property that could be concerning?
I wouldn't say concerning. There were 3 sinkholes, or well, still arguably sinkholes. It needs a bit more analysis, but we're assuming there's sinkholes. So we had our engineers look at it. So this is nothing like a fault line, right, where you have a mandatory buffer zone and, you know, it's going to highly increase construction costs. Sinkholes on Guam, and they're all over, particularly in the northern area over the lens. They use this design features particularly for stormwater management. So we consulted with EPA on what our options were, whether this was going to be an impediment to development, and we did our due diligence before we put that offer in. That's one of the things that kind of created that delay to flush all that out before we put an offer in. Otherwise, we probably would have been done sooner. So we wanted to be assured that the sinkholes wouldn't be an impediment to the development of the hospital.
Okay, and the purchase of this property was done with all federal dollars.
Correct.
So it didn't involve the legislature in any way. It didn't involve the.
According to the Supreme Court, no need, no.
But Governor, for the actual construction of the hospital, what are your plans for it? Are you looking to court the legislature or go through federal funding?
Well, we already have a law that was authorized, passed by the legislature and signed into law that allows us to go out into the bond market, the open capital market, with a debt service of about $35 million a year. So that law is already in place. So we do not have to go down to the legislature for authority to do that. And so the financing plan for this hospital is basically we're trying to get as many federal grants that we can have to build it. We're trying to get money from the Department of Defense also to help with the construction of the hospital, as this hospital will also provide services for both military and civilian, and also going out into the open market. But I would prefer to first prioritize grants and decrease the debt services for our people. Sure. And FHA, yeah.
So for the first time ever, we've been, and this is, I think, part of the synergy we're having with our partnership is when Guerrero was brought into the conversation about the hospital, we were able to look into options on the HUD side. And so we were looking at the Federal Housing Administration, which has never, they have an office, it's called the Office of Healthcare Facilities, which has never done anything on Guam before. And so we had the opportunity of starting to bridge those connections. And what they do is they provide mortgage or backings of mortgages for hospital and healthcare facilities. And what does that mean to the public? That means that, you know, aside from being AAA rated on the bond market, being backed by the FHA for any loans is going to save the taxpayers of Guam tens of millions of dollars in interest. And so having to do all these things from a finance and, you know, generally financing, and I'm not getting involved in too many of those details, right? But understanding that overall process, it's how do we reduce the price tag, the final ticket or sticker price that actually has to go to the legislature, would have to go to the legislature for funding. And so that's through grants, FHA backing, the bond market, where Guam is looking very favorable. So there's a lot of financial options that come in that planning that we're all kind of putting our heads together to reduce that number down, and also reduce the construction cost through potential waivers for construction materials, particularly with federal funds, right? The BABA waivers.
Joe Taitano, PDN. Senator Chris Barnett just stated he received a response to a FOIA request sent to Guerrero a few minutes ago. And I think he raised a concern that there's an Edward Camacho, who was the co-administrator of Miss Catalina Camacho's estate. And his signature is reflected on the return of sale in the probate case. In the center, it said that he is employed as a program manager at Gita, and their staffing documents do reflect that. Is Gura aware or engaged with Mr. Camacho in any way through the process?
I had no engagement with Mr. Camacho, right? So the administrators of the estate had an agent. They had a selling agent. We had a buying agent. When you do real estate transactions, particularly on Guam, you keep the transactions at arm's length. What you analyze for are immediate conflicts of interest. So I would expect that, of course, Gita would prevent any conflicts of interest, but the land acquisition has nothing to do with Gita, right? He's not an employee of Gura. No employee of Gura that we're aware of, based on our analysis, had an interest in the property there when we did the purchase, right? Neither did any of the realtors that we understand when they do the disclosure required under the GAR. So as I said, and I think to the previous question, sure, there are probably errors that you could find in any real estate or any land estate you have on Guam that's going to have somebody working somewhere in the government. But on our end, no, this was a Gura transaction. He's not an employee of Gura.
And for clarification, at any step in the process, is Gita involved in this purchase?
No, not at all. No, they have nothing to do with the purchase.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions from members of our media, this will conclude today's press conference. Again, thank you so much for joining us here at the office of the Governor of Guam. Have a great week.